Hello and welcome to the Mysticast, where you join Jack Stafford and Deborah Littleboy, members of the Aetherius Society, the cosmic religion for the Aquarian Age, as we break down the barriers between religion, science, metaphysics, philosophy, and mysticism, all of which are really only aspects of the self-same crest for truth. Please note this is an independent program, not produced or fact-checked by the Aetherius Society. Today, our guest is Robert Woolley. Hello, Robert.
Hello, hello.
Wonderful to have you.
Well, it's good to be talking to you.
Well, it's great to speak to a man of such...
We haven't got the pictures, but at least we've got some sound.
Yeah, that's the most important thing. It is a podcast first and foremost.
Good.
Well, there's so many different things we could talk about today. You're a traveling lecturer for the Theosophical Society. Is that the right way to put it?
I'm a national lecturer for the Theosophical Society, yes, which means that the Theosophical Society will, as it were, provide me to do a lecture for you if you want one.
Well, we want one.
We'll do that as a charitable activity.
Wow.
So even if you are impoverished and you can't pay my train fare, you can still have a talk.
That's wonderful. Well, we just need the price of a phone call here today. So
yeah, that's all it is.
Well, there were so many, I think there were 11 different topics on your site, but the one that most interested us, what was that, Deborah? The nature of spiritual service.
Yeah, tools of the trade for a spiritual aspirant. And you...
Is that what it says?
Well, it may not have, because I've got a good... I'm quite good at making stuff up, actually, Robert. But it was all about nature of spiritual service, and the way that this is from memory now, that
okay.
It was like levels of spiritual service, so that you could dig in your pocket and put some money in somebody's can that was rattling, or you could help your neighbor type of service. But there was a higher spiritual service that could be of most use to humanity. And there's certain tools that we can use, is what it was my understanding. I was rather hoping that you would go through those tools with us, and we could compare notes on what we have in the society with yours, and see if we can come up with a sort of a daily practice, if you want, a sort of a base daily practice. If that sounds okay.
Yeah, that makes sense, because it does sort of reflect one of the things that's in that talk. I think we're not going to have a big argument here. I mean, if you were hoping for a nice intense debate, I had a look on the Aetherius site, and basically we're on the same page. So
that's good.
I think it's a question of how we express it. But I start with the concept of unity, and I think you do too. But that's the starting point for the various pages that you sent me links to, and it's a concept that gave me a lot of trouble when I first joined the Theosophical Society, because all this stuff about there is fundamentally only one being, we are all one. But, you know, you're in Italy and Kent, I'm in Northamptonshire, and we obviously aren't one. And this gave me a problem. And the other thing that was difficult for me was this insistence on brotherhood and service to humanity. And I'm thinking, but I came to this to find out something interesting. And that's a different motivation. So, I mean, that was me back then. And what changed it for me was discovering a diagram, which I was going to show you. But if you imagine a square with a small circle in the middle.
Uh-huh.
Just a small circle in the middle. And that is the one. Now, if you take from the edges of the circle a pair of lines that come to and meet at a point somewhere near the top of the square, and do the same opposite it down to the bottom of the square, and then do the same to the sides, and then fill in kind of another 32 of them. Just imagine it, you know, sort of totals of them. what you'll see is this thing that looks like a star or a sun.
Okay.
Some sort of thing. Yeah. And the idea is that each of those beams shining out from the sun represents one of us. And the tip of it is your physical consciousness. And you can see that it's completely separate from the adjacent ones. Yeah? All those little points, they're all completely separate. But as you go further inward, you get closer.
Yes.
So if you imagine you've gone into the emotional level, you're a bit closer. You go closer in towards the middle to the mental level, and you're a bit closer still. And at some point, you start to overlap. And then right in the center, of course, it's all one thing. So it showed me how we are one thing in essence, in consciousness, but because we are each individually focused out in a different direction, we see it all differently.
Okay, so sorry, carry on, Robert.
If you look out, we're all looking in different direction and we're seeing different things and we're separate. If you look in, we're all one. And it's that looking in which is absolutely crucial, because it means that the next ray or beam or whatever you call it is really me just expressing itself differently. And that's a standard spiritual teaching for millennia. But it took me a diagram like that to see it, to see that it represents the different levels at which you can relate to somebody.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So when you start to look at it like that, when you start to understand what this unity might mean, then you start to develop compassion. Start to understand where other people are, and you start to recognize them as in effect the same as yourself, and that takes you into some sort of service. And like you were saying, in the physical world, that might be charity work, might be helping people in all sorts of different ways, but it's a physical thing. But if you start to understand it spiritually, you start to experience that unity, know it, then you get to a different place. And that's when action starts to flow from the self, basically. So I think it was Ramana Maharshi who said that the greatest service you can do is your own enlightenment. Because that's where you get to this identity with the self, and you simply radiate service. And action flows from you that is necessarily service. So,
and how do people react? Sorry to interrupt you, but how do people, when you're radiating service, how do people react to you? So sort of like a then and now type of situation. So if you're coming from a place of oneness and unity, and you realize that everybody else might not be are still in a state of duality, and so when you come into a conflict situation, a difference of opinion, if you like, how do you overcome that? What's the mindset? What do you physically do?
Well, that's a very good question, because it's one that puzzles me and puzzles people who think about these things. But when you're coming from the self, then it isn't about thought.
Okay.
There's an awareness that simply functions through you. I had a chat about this sort of thing with some other people in the group I go to, and one of them was saying, that there are times when some situation crops up and you just have to say something or do something. There are times when what you say or do just does itself. You don't think about it, you don't plan it, it just does itself. And that's one of those ways in which this works. He gave an example. He used to be a teacher. And there was the headmaster giving the sixth form a bit of a pep talk about they'd really got to pull their fingers out and do some work.
Uh-huh.
And he says, because you only live once. And this friend of mine, a teacher and teaching the sixth form, he goes, are you sure? And there's this deathly silence, and then the entire sixth form started clapping. And, it's one of those points where, because you have that connection, something comes through you and acts and makes a point or changes the situation. Does that give you an answer to the question?
What I've heard is that you find a way of deflecting the conflict, so you lighten the situation, because you're not actually going into combat with the combatant, if you want.
Well,
so maybe you can only fight if somebody if somebody else is going to fight you.
Yes, that's right. You can. Yes, it is about not rising to the fighting challenge. Yes, but it's also not actually about just a bit of humour lightening the situation. It's something that comes through from from higher.
And what are these? Just to interrupt him, what are the tools that you mentioned? Are we talking about prayer?
Well, yes, that will come on one of the lists. Because once you are talking about the actions that you can take, you think about the various groups that do meditation for service, about healing, or you think about maybe triangles. But when you do those things, you have a group that is actually radiating. Now, it may be radiating at a mental level, or could be at an emotional level, but usually it's mental. And think about the triangles arrangements that those trust people use. Do you know about those?
No. Maybe you could go into a bit more depth on those.
All right. Well, I'll say a little bit more about that. But they have this thing with groups of three people who, well, like us now, don't have to be in physically the same place. Can be anywhere. But they link in on a daily basis at a specified time. So, and that doesn't necessarily have to be physical either. You don't have to have a telephone line. It's a mental thing. And they meditate together at that specific time on topic of unity, and they use the great invocation. And the point is that great invocation functions rather like a mantra, and it's said to produce a channel for the masters to influence things. You have the same kind of idea, really, with the Power of Eight groups that Lynn McTaggart talks about.
Uh-huh.
Her intention experiments. That's done from a much more personality-centered level, but it's done in the same way by getting several people linking together, which amplifies the thought, what radiates. I think there's an interesting point which Ledbetter makes, which is that if you think about the levels of thinking, from very personality, selfish sort of level of thinking, physical stuff, up to very spiritual, the higher frequencies, rather like the higher frequency wave bands for radio, are a bit empty. So when you start broadcasting at that level, you're not drowned out by noise, which you would be at the lower levels.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we talk a lot about spiritual energy. Dr. King, he told us there was a spiritual energy crisis. There's many people doing service on the material plane, helping those in need, but there is a crisis, a spiritual energy crisis, and spiritual energy is a real thing. So you can radiate it, radiate it out through, like Reiki from one person to another, or through prayer to humanity as a whole, or to a specific group of people.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. In fact, I think the action of paying attention to something is a sending out of energy.
Right.
Well, you know this business of staring at the back of somebody's head, and they turn around to look who's seeing.
Sure.
At them. Yeah, well, that's part of it, because as you stare at them, you're sending out energy, and it's disrupting them. They know it. And people who go hunting are taught to follow the prey without looking directly at it, so that you don't alert the target to your presence. And the same sort of thing happens with children. I mean, they know when you're not paying attention, and they want you to. You can probably remember school situations. You can remember teachers who could control a class with their attention, and those who couldn't. So there's this energy which comes from your attention, which is basically your focused consciousness. So that is essentially spiritual energy. If you're coupling it with thought, you're thinking and paying attention to spiritual ideas intensely and together with other people, that thought is going out. It's going to influence people.
Yeah, that really chimes in with what the teachings of the society, and there's also this element of service we wanted to talk about, is because that's what the masters say, that Dr. King also said that in the past there was an element of selfishness, and it is just to pick up on what you said, that the greatest thing I could do for myself is if I achieve enlightenment, then yes, I'll be an ascended master eventually, and then I can be of greater service than many thousands of people put together. But in these times, we're taught that we're brought into line with the other classrooms, the other planets, that service to humanity rather than pursuing of enlightenment is the way to go.
Yes, but the two things go opposite sides of the same coin.
You mean you can't help but advancing if you...
That's right. I think if you do one, you do the other.
Right. Yeah, but in terms of motive, they are different.
Yes, they are. And I think there's actually quite an interesting issue there. There's a bit of writing in Ledbetter's work, which I'd quite like to quote you. It's rather interesting, because he's saying that you can form a group and make it fit for the masters to put energy through? And I'm sure that's a concept that will fit with what you do.
Definitely. That's why the masters, the Ascended Masters created the Theosophical Society, and then the Cosmic Masters, they formed through the Ascended Masters, the Aetherius Society.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same thing. So he says, you are told to meditate on the one. And the quote, I am that self am I.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you do that, for the time being, you perhaps really do realize that inner self. And when you all do it simultaneously, then there should be a few moments when the whole group could be used as an instrument for the helping of other men. You can be and you will be used just to the extent to which you can make yourselves fit for it. So much a matter of your brotherly feeling. So this is where the brotherhood side of things comes in. And it's making that group one thing at several different levels at once. It's one thing in consciousness anyway, but when those consciousnesses are all focused on the same thought, with the same feeling, it becomes very powerful.
Mm-hmm. But we know we're not here just to be channels for the higher masters. We're told in these days that miracles are not done by God for man, but by man for God. And these days that's because of Dr. King. He charged the holy mountains, and we can channel this energy and accomplish more than an adept could in ancient times.
Well, I'm not really in a position to comment on that, having just heard it. But I mean, I think what I've just quoted from Ledbetter and what I've said about triangles and their use of the great invocation, or any other sorts of invocation of that sort, are all you're forming a structure, an energy structure, if you like, which the higher powers can use. So you're not actually putting any personality into that. You're not getting in the way of the self doing what the self needs to do. But when you start to do things like these Power of Eight groups and intention experiments, you start to get into territory where you at the personality level are deciding what you want to achieve. And that may not actually be very productive. I'm not saying it's necessarily not a good thing. It obviously is, but I think one has to be careful with it.
This is drawing a memory link back for me, Robert. I used to work in prison, working with people that were addicted to substances and obviously addicted to criminal activity. And we would work in groups. I was a facilitator on group work. We'd have 12 men, up to 12 men in a room, working as a group to find out these common links. And what I'm hearing now, the connection I've made is that because they were actually coming together with a common focus, they, at a very low level, and maybe for the first time ever, they were actually working to try and better themselves, if you want, not to have antisocial behaviour, that actually they will have been, because we saw some quite amazing things come through, but they will have been, maybe their higher selves were coming through into that group moment, and I knew that it worked, and I could almost see the energy levels in the rooms, and I could certainly taste it when things were working right. But you explaining it it's given me a different slant. So if you like, from the center out to the rays, I can now see it at the very basic level. It still works, and of course it has to, because it's all of that oneness. So I know that's a bit of an aside, but it's quite heartening for me to realise that how these things are put together. So thank you for that.
Well, I'm glad to help. Yes, but I mean, I think that's a good example, and there are many things where we can do something very useful like that. But I think there are times when it may actually interfere with other things that the universe is trying to do. I'm trying to think of a good example, and I haven't really got one to hand, but you could see somebody really struggling to do something which they're not used to doing, and you could just go and do it for them. Now, wouldn't that be kind and helpful?
Yeah, well, except they wouldn't learn, would they?
Yeah, but actually, you've just deprived them of a learning opportunity.
Hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So, and I think there are times when people are confronted with some karma and you shouldn't really be changing it. I'm not saying that you see somebody fall under a bus and you go, that was his karma, and walk on.
No.
Obviously, you need to do something. But there is a risk that when you're working from the personality level, you put personality-centered things into the mix, which actually get in the way.
Yeah, it's almost like the mother that needs to get her own sense of worth by doing everything for the child.
Yes,
Almost
yeah, that's yes, that's probably one example. So yeah, I think that's true. But even when you start to think about necessarily as working with groups, and if you start to think about your own day-to-day personal interactions, again, there's a change in the way you come at things, depending on which level you're looking at it from. When you go to a supermarket, you've got your basket of stuff and you go up to the till. What do you see? You go to the till and you see this this person sat there. But do you see a physical body just pushing buttons? You see the embodiment of boredom. You see a stunted and stagnating intellect.
Yeah.
Or do you see a spiritual being on its way to enlightenment? So, what are you looking at? And how does that affect the way you interact with them?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, yeah.
And I think that's quite, I think it's quite important.
Yeah, it could be a service, can be as simple as a good interaction like that. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it can be really, really simple. And one of the things that was said to me recently was, well, anything counts as service that helps to raise the level of a person's consciousness.
Mm.
And there's unseen ways, but you only see the opportunity and take it if you've got that awareness yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe I could just quickly read a few words from the Nine Freedoms, which is the book Dr. King channeled about our spiritual path for evolution. The third freedom is service, so it's really relevant. It says, freedom from selfishness is service. In these days, there is much service which is vitally important to terror. There are few servers. Service is a culmination of experiences which denote the server as being on the ladder of evolution. Firmly on this ladder, Those who have a yearning desire to serve, and indeed are doing so, are those who have slain selfishness, are those who are gradually overcoming their lower materialistic aspects, are those who are sometimes slowly, but nevertheless surely advancing towards enlightenment. In these days upon terror, it is selfless action called service, which will count in your initiations of tomorrow. Your service to others will be known, and you will judge yourselves accordingly. If you would burn up your lower karmic aspects, you would serve. If you would build at this very moment tomorrow's temples upon the sure foundations of today's right action, you would serve. If you would be free from the materialistic prison cunningly devised to enslave you, you would serve. It goes on. It's couple of pages of wonderful words, but I won't read them all.
But that's it, yes. The greatest service is your own progress to enlightenment, being on the path. And being on the path involves service.
Yeah, karma yoga, action.
Yeah, that's yes, right. It is. The further you get, I think the more you are living from a level where maybe not so many other people live, and the kind of quality that you are radiating is a different one, and it affects people. They don't know it affects them. I mean, I don't know if you talk in the Aetherius Society in terms of things like group mind. Do you? Does group mind mean anything?
No, group mind means quite a lot to me, but I don't, and I think that it's understood that we're told that the more of us that are gathered with a single pointed focus, the more potent the energy will be. And so therefore the joining of the mind would actually amplify the energy and the results, like a laser, if you want. It's a more pointed, powerful response. But I don't think that I've ever heard the collective mind quoted within.
We're in a sea of mind. Maybe that's.
Sorry?
Yeah. We exist in a sea of mind. Maybe that's.
Well, absolutely, and there is a sort of mind that belongs to any particular group. I mean, you can think of it nationally. An English mind is different from a German mind.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of grow up in a sea of mental activity that's peculiar to your family. There is a kind of family mind. But you will gather, you will be part of several groups like this. When you're in school, there'll be a kind of class or year mind, and you're influenced by it. What other people are doing and thinking as a group is going to influence you. And this is behind the sort of things that we call peer pressure. You know, everybody's doing it. I'm going to do it. And it's much more subtle than that, because it's the thinking, it's the thoughts, the assumptions, not necessarily the thoughts you think, the thoughts you think with.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's there. And if we influence some of those group minds, then it influences lots and lots of people. That's very powerful.
Yeah, I'm understanding that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the places where we need to do that sort of work. And then there are, I suppose, there are meditations and practices that are recommended. But I mean,
it all comes down to we're all cells in the whole. So if we raise our consciousness, but I think we do in this society. I think they do advocate more like direct action, and that yes, you can, because we all we sit down and we do our practices in the morning, and we meditate in quotations there. But meditation is, I mean, it goes first you meditate, first you concentrate, then you contemplate, and then meditation is a very advanced state. When you're actually, it's very few people actually achieve what we meditation is a wrongly used word, but
well, yes,
instead of
right.
instead of just meditating or becoming at peace, so therefore the soul, the group soul, is a little bit more at peace. We can raise our consciousness through mantra and through pranayama, and then through prayer we project spiritual energy out. So we're taking direct action, even though we're immobile physically. We're sending out, targeting spiritual energy to help end a war. I mean, we in the society we pray into batteries, into which contain crystals, and store those prayer hours for release at a crisis point. So we can direct these energies to a particular cause, and take direct spiritual action in ways that are very advanced.
Yeah, well, that makes perfectly good sense, and I assume that's done under some direction from a master or something.
Well, it was set up by Dr. King, so he designed the apparatus. Is that right, Deborah?
Yes, that's correct. And trained, and now the people that were trained to train, and so it's very much a precise procedure. And of course, once we've got a battery full of spiritual energy, it's a very precious commodity, and we have to keep it very safe, because as you would know, Robert, that energy can be used for good or for selfish means.
Yes.
So we have to be very, very mindful of keeping those batteries secure.
Well, quite. But you're describing there something which only somebody with the skills and the knowledge that you have on that path could possibly do. You could spend your time rattling a collection tin for cancer research outside the supermarket, but it's a much better use of your time to do what you just described, because anybody can go and rattle a tin outside the supermarket.
Bingo.
But the beauty, Robert, is that it doesn't take an awful lot of training to be those that can almost like giving blood. Yes, I have to. I mean, I go to fill up the battery if you want, and so I'm part of the mantra team. So my training is just to literally know what I'm to do, to focus on the person that's praying in front of the battery, and to generate mantra by mantra to generate the energy through me and into that battery. It takes very little training. But what it does take is the effort for me to get from Kent up to London to sit there for the 90 minutes to do it. So yes, lots of people could give this really beautiful, potent service with minimal training, except that there aren't many people I'm speaking to. There aren't many people that would even accept that
There's not a queue outside the door.
Spiritual energy is a real thing. We've got this whole sort of not that many servers at the higher level, because there are not many people that actually understand that it is a physical thing that can be manipulated. But the way you've been describing mental energy and group energy is something that that a lot more people can actually tune in and understand. So I think that this conversation is actually really useful to people that maybe haven't considered that next step.
Yeah, power of intention.
Well, I do hope it is useful. But let me say one thing about this group and energy thing. I am struck by two different things. The way people are afraid to talk about it. And I had a manager who used to go, "Oh, you only live once," and I always thought, "Shall I say something?" And I missed the chance. Until I resolved, I will say something next time he said it. Well, he never ever said it again. But I was standing in a supermarket queue, and something was gone wrong at the till, and we were stuck, and you know how it goes. And got chatting to the bloke who's behind me, and he said it. So I challenged it. He said, well, yeah, actually, do come back. And there's a lot more acceptance out there than you'd expect, actually.
Mm.
And the other thing that strikes me is that there are quite a few people around now writing books and doing and things who are basically in the financial world, but they realised that things like the stock market are a kind of group mind,
Yeah,
a herd, and they function like a herd. And they're starting to realise that things move in cycles, and that there's something outside the physical system that drives the cycle. So they're talking about levels of energy and being that aren't just physical. And these are sort of hard financial people. Why is it coming through there rather than through organisations like ours?
Mm.
Because the motivation is still very materialistic on this realm, and people are more interested in chinking the coins in their pocket. And so, if you like, there's the focus and the motivation for it. Understand the patterns and the trend and the group mind, and we make more money.
Yes, but I think the people whom I've been reading have moved past that. I think that they're actually quite explicit. The reason they're publicising the stuff, rather than keeping it to themselves and making pots of money, is because the world needs to know it.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
And I think that's it is valuable service, but I'm still intrigued to understand why it's coming through there rather than through organisations like ours.
Mm.
Yeah. I don't have an answer to that, but thought I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah. Well, also I wanted to switch off the subject at the end of the conversation, just to go through some of the other lectures that you've had. And one that caught my eye was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wisdom, how C.S. Lewis planted ancient knowledge, ancient wisdom straight out of Blavatsky's secret doctrines in each of his 7 books.
Yes, it's there, and it fascinates me. I do that talk, and usually at some point I'll just invite the audience to come up with a theosophical teaching, something out of the ancient wisdom, and I'll find it for them in those books. It's crazy, and the thing that really intrigues me about that is, you look at the first of the series that he wrote, which was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. He actually said somewhere in writing that he'd written it in the hope of expressing some religious feeling, but without the stained glass image and solemn Sunday school feel to it. And it feels like an intellectual exercise. It feels contrived, thought about it and planned it, put it together, and it sort of works, but it's a bit clunky. Somewhere else he says the idea of Aslan came to him, I think he said, in a dream, and he made use of it in that story. But he said once Aslan came into it, he dragged all the other stories with him. And it's the Aslan coming into those stories that seems to bring all that teaching with it. It just flows out. No, I just think it's amazing. And if you you look at the astrology in it, you know, you've got that theory of each of the books is one of the 7 classical planets. And that's another one. That's another story. Not for the moment.
Yeah, you have to come back, I think, on another time and go more in depth in that one. Because... Well, this has been really interesting, Robert. It's super great to chat to you. Is there anything else you think we didn't cover?
Well, I think we've pretty much done it, haven't we? All the things I noted down that we probably ought to talk about have got spoken. There's just... No, I'll leave that. No, I think we've covered the ground, really, if I've answered your questions.
Anything else, Deborah? Do you have to...
No, it's been a pleasure, but I would like to invite you back again, Robert, on one of your other lectures. Once we've sorted out, so we can look at your lovely face.
Yeah.
I must get this sorted out one way or another, yes. But I can always give an email when I have.
Brilliant. So where would you direct people to if they've enjoyed this conversation? Which website would you direct them to? Would it be the Theosophical Society or?
Well, the Theosophical Society in England is the obvious place to point people to, yes. But they could also look at things like the Lucis Trust website.
Okay.
Well, obviously I direct them to yours as well, but then you'll do that. Well, yes, I mean, those are the kind of places you'd go.
All right, well, that's theosophicalsociety.org.uk.
Yes, that's the one. That's the London-based one. You happen to be in Italy, I'm sure there's a different one. I don't know what it is, but if you're in India...
Yeah. Just Google Theosophical
go to the
Society.
Agile one.
Wonderful. Well, if people are interested in the Aetherius Society, they can go to aetherius.org. Thank you very much for joining us, Robert.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Bye. Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.